Welcome along to another instalment of Business Risk Mitigation Week here on Property Tribes. This is all part of our Smart Landlord campaign taking place across 2019. And joining me now on this topic is Richard Bowser, editor of Property Investor News. And Richard, I know this is a topic quite close to your heart, and I don't think that we talk about risk mitigation enough, because in property, prevention is always less expensive, less heartache than cure.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. It's about making sure that you are as prepared as possible for every potential eventuality that the marketplace or your tenants or lenders or politicians throw your way.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a constantly changing sector as well, and things that you might have been doing before. Something can come along, a kind of black swan event, and just turn your whole business upside down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Whether it be a car factory closing unexpectedly, whether it be a politician bringing a tax change that hadn't previously been thought of, whether it be a lender suddenly deciding that they were happy to lend to you on your portfolio of HMOs, and all of a sudden they change their lending criteria. These are things that the marketplace throws at us, and we have to be, as landlords, as developers, as prepared as possible.
We can't really rest on our laurels. You had a good example of student accommodation where an institutional investor comes in and builds thousands of rooms. I mean, that can have a serious impact on tenant demand.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So it is about, if you're a student property landlord in any given city or town, you need to keep very close eye on what that university's policy is, what is their policy of the local authorities. There are certain local authorities, Nottingham being an example, that have been very pro the PBSA sector, the purpose-built student accommodation sector. And of course that to some extent has been to the detriment of private landlords in Nottingham, and the same authority has been very keen on licensing, etc. So, and then of course, if a local authority is very keen on the idea of more purpose-built student accommodation, you need to make sure that your own property portfolios are in as good a condition as possible and a robust enough business, and not to be highly leveraged, so that you can compete against these operators.
No, absolutely. I guess part of business risk mitigation, it's not just having a plan A, it's having a plan B and a plan C, so you can prepare for any eventuality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can't be obsessed. I mean, it's a good thing to be obsessed about running a very competitive business as a landlord, as a developer, and being very customer focused. But if you obviously get into too much into the detail, then you'd never make any positive decision and you wouldn't move forward. So, yeah, it's just about, work out what might be the best case scenario, worst case scenario, and just make sure you can deal with it, and make sure you've got people in place or policies in place to deal with those, negative circumstances if they come about. Sometimes they don't. Great.
No, I know, and I think that, we have to accept that if we're in property for the long term, which obviously I know we both recommend, you're talking 15, 20 years, even if you run a very, very tight ship, you do all your due diligence, you have your professional advice, there still is inevitably going to be something that comes along that throws you a real curveball. You can't mitigate against everything, can you? No,
and I mean, as I mentioned earlier, off camera, I've had a difficult situation to deal with in the last 7 days. We were just about to go away for a short break last weekend. Got a phone call from one of my lettings agents, and there'd been a fire at one of my properties. It's a property that I've had for nearly 20 years. I've done very well from this property. It's in good condition, but there had been an electrical problem at the property, and the problem was nothing to do with me. It was a certificated property, all in order. Unfortunately, my tenant decided to hire a sunbed, and for some reason beknown to them, decided to put it into a child's bedroom. That was their decision. the one thing I would suggest now, and I've said this earlier at a seminar that I did to all the people in that room, is you might want to check your tenancy agreements and maybe get them amended and get a clause inserted to state that a landlord insists that the tenant cannot hire a sunbed or an electrical appliance of that nature, which is potentially a fire hazard, without the landlord or the letting agent's permission.
That's a very good tip, Richard. Perfect for our week. I mean, you were protected against regulatory risk because you had a certificated property. You were protected against financial risk because you had the correct insurance in place.
Yes.
Nobody wants to get that call that a property has had a fire. Thankfully, nobody was hurt.
No.
And your insurance is taking all the appropriate actions.
Yes. No. I mean, thankfully, that is the case, and it's not a gutted property. It'll be, from what I understand, £8,000 or £9,000 worth of damage. It's more for me. It's a whole heap of administration that I've got to deal with. In terms of liaising with the agents, dealing with contractors, getting trades in to do the work. Thankfully, the people that I deal with, I've been dealing with for the best part of 20 years. They've got my total trust as my agency, and they use good, reputable, quality people. So I know that the property will be restored. The insurers, that's already going through fairly quickly. I hope that nothing untoward occurs to interrupt that. But it's just one of the things, unfortunately, in life. It's just an example that something that you don't expect suddenly it comes out of the blue. Yeah.
Indeed, it can. I mean, let's just wind up here with just talking a little bit about how to mitigate business risk, because probably the number one way to do that would be due diligence.
Yes. Yes. So, I mean, for example, I've just given you where my due diligence many years ago on selecting agents to manage properties that I have, which are 250 miles away from where I live. It has resulted in a very good business relationship, which has rewarded me and the management company, or the two management companies that I use on those properties. So that due diligence has paid off.
Yeah.
But we see so many examples of people who take for granted people, services, companies, very well-speaking, clever marketers at property events who can sell ice to Eskimos.
Yeah.
And you cannot take any of this stuff for granted. We have now the tools to pretty much drill using software, to get a pretty good understanding of however articulate that individual might be at a property event or on a stage or on a face-to-face meeting. It's not too difficult now to get a pretty good idea with a few clicks of a few mouses, whatever, and arrive at a conclusion. If it's positive, great.
Yeah.
You've done your due diligence.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it's as what I do as a journalist, as a publisher, and that's to ask questions. And that's what we do, Vanessa. We ask questions, and we ask questions of 3, 4, 5 people, and then we can, we've then got a summary of contrasting opinions, and we can make our own judgment call. And that's all part of the due diligence process. And that should be the due diligence of a landlord as a property developer when looking at a potential opportunity.
No, I totally agree. And we've got, as you mentioned, we've got so many tools. We've got Companies House, we've got just put a name into Google, we've got forums, we've got magazines like Property Investor News. Really, there's actually no excuse in this digital day and age, with the amount of information that landlords have access to, not to do their due diligence, not to manage risk.
No, not at all. I mean, unfortunately, we're all human. We want to trust. We want to like that person in front of us. We get emotionally perhaps attached to the story that's being spun from some very clever marketing people. And there's nothing wrong with marketers. They, don't get me wrong. But one needs to question what one is being told, and don't take for granted. Don't make assumptions, because we see so many people with property deals making assumptions. on the back of some biased opinions from people who have got a vested interest in spinning a story. Yeah.
And as we said, when it goes wrong, it can really financially destroy you. So it's very important to mitigate risk at every single opportunity. And I think we both agree that one way to do that is to join a landlord association. They have some excellent training courses.
Oh, they certainly do. I mean, whether it be the National Landlords Association, the Residential Landlords Association, or iHouse, predominantly southern-based. I've known Peter and Mike at iHouse, what used to be called the SLA, Southern Landlords Association, for many, many years. They've got the interests. All of these associations are now very, very professional. They've got fantastic websites, helplines, all sorts of products and the cost of the subscription, it's crazy. £70-80 a year.
Tax deductible.
Yeah, exactly. Tax deductible, unlike your mortgage interest these days. I belong to two and landlord associations. And then that very, very rarely. But I know that if I've got a question, there are professionals on hand to answer any question that I might have. And for £70-80 a year, it's peanuts.
And I think, Richard, when it comes to advice, if you're going to a mortgage advisor, a tax advisor, whoever you're going to, that professional advice, it's qualified and it's insured advice. And I think that what concerns me about some of the wealth creation and property trainers and some of the people out there saying you can be a property millionaire in a year with very little money, their advice is not insured. It's unregulated advice. So you should always look where there's regulation, certainly as you mentioned it with letting agents, that they're properly accredited, have client money protection in place, etc. So landlords really do have to understand where there's regulation and they can tap into that, and the sectors where there aren't any regulations, because they're going to be very dangerous spaces.
Absolutely. Lettings agency business. Not all that long ago, there was barely a week went by without a letting agent going bust, taking, in many cases, hundreds of thousands. I think there's been a case that was reported in the last few weeks about
220,000.
Yeah, down in the West Country. But I can remember, literally at one stage, there wasn't a week that had gone by, and of course that then leaves tenants who have paid deposits and the deposits haven't been protected, landlords that haven't been paid the rents that the tenants have actually paid, and in some cases hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds through malpractice or just someone letting their business get out of control, or sadly also downright criminality.
Yep.
And of course the tenants suffer, the landlord suffers, and yeah.
Indeed. Well, we'll put the link underneath this video of how to vet a lettings agent, and we just want to give a hat tip to the Landlord and Investment Show. We're here today.
Yes.
Got 4,000 landlords coming through the door, and it's good to see these landlords coming here, Richard, really, because landlords have to pretty much commit to professional development, raising their game, and not working in isolation, because it's risky being out on your own.
Yeah, for sure. No man is an island, or woman, etc. So it is a relatively lonely experience, at times. And so it's understandable that people do want to congregate together in these types of environments, and wholeheartedly recommend these types of shows, the Landlord Investment Show, the Property Investor Show, and what some of the other smaller ones that take place. And also the meetings as well, and the Landlord Association meetings. So there's no real excuse for not getting along to these events. And with these ones today, such as we've had very experienced panel debate earlier on governmental policy and the opportunity. I don't know how many people are in that room, but I don't know, it must have been 800 or 1,000 people. So the opportunity is there. Yeah.
Well, actually, it's funny we should just mention that, because probably the one thing you can't insure against is government policy or a new tax regime coming out or something of that nature. So we've all really got to be on top of our game in these challenging environments.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree. I mean, that's what I keep saying. The market's moving, the market's changing. It always does. I think I might have mentioned earlier, we all need a roof over our heads to sleep at night. All businesses need premises to work within, most businesses. And whilst those need for that accommodation, that whether it be commercial accommodation, whether it be residential accommodation, there's opportunity to make profit and to create income from property investment.